says R1, R2, and R3 has been scratched out just as a residential.
What section are you guys?
We're all family. We're all blood. We're all everybody's family. We from you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Building and Lands Committee meeting. It is 7 o'clock on the 4th of June. I'm going to do attendance, and then right after attendance, I'd like to turn it over to Councilman Mayhorn for a brief moment. With that, Mr. Van Truren, Mr. Miller,
Present.
Mr. Janney,
Here.
Mr. Dembinsky,
Here.
Winarski is here, Mr. Cowger,
Here.
Mr. Mayhorn,
Present.
and then members of the administration are all present with the exception of Mr. Jeffries. I entertain a motion to excuse Mr. Mayhorn.
Motion to excuse Mr. Van Truren and Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Second, if you need one.
Thank you. With that, we have a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Van Truren and Mr. Jeffries. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say nay. And they are excused, and with attendance being complete, I'd like to turn it over to Councilman Mayhorn, please.
Let us please stand. Please join me in bowing your heads. Gracious God, we take this moment out of our busy day to stop and reflect on the sacrifices our safety forces make each and every day they put on their uniforms. This evening, we pray for the healing of Amherst police officer and SWAT team member Eugene Tasek. We recognize the sacrifices he has made to keep our community a safer place and thank him for taking on the dangerous unknowns which make up his job. We pray for Officer Tasek's speedy and complete recovery. And now let the words of our mouths and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your vision. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Councilman Mayhorn. Tonight's agenda includes one item. It's A 1829. This is an ordinance to amend the Amherst Codified Ordinance 1145.14b with regards to off-street parking and loading. This is submitted by the mayor.
Or the building inspector.
I'm sorry, the building inspector. In the absence of the building inspector, I'd like to turn it over to the administration. Maybe we'll start with the mayor.
Thank you. This is part of our section. The building inspector would like to tighten up a little bit. There's been quite a few requests lately for more than one driveway on lots, so the building inspector thinks a more appropriate way to handle second driveway or curb cuts would be to limit them to one initially, and if somebody would want a second one, they could go in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. That way you know it's a special circumstance or a reason that somebody actually needs a second cut other than they just want a second driveway. When he wrote this, he also wanted to clean up the language about where you can park a vehicle in your backyard, and he came up with the language on an appropriate parking surface. At first glance, it seemed like a good wording, but maybe that wording could be tightened up a little bit, what an appropriate parking surface is. In the section above that, you might not have it in front of you, it talks about an appropriate surface for a driveway as a all-weather and dustless surface. So that's probably a 1965-ish ordinance, so maybe that language could also get tightened up. So if you do find that, other than the description of what an appropriate parking surface is, and send this to the floor of council, law department and the building department could better describe what that is. So that would be my one suggestion, to tighten that language. But this is a good idea to limit it to one parking space and where they can park in their backyards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that, it lends itself to the next question, which I believe is apparent. The law director, Mr. Carlson, what language or how would you like to proceed with the suggestion that the language be tightened up?
Well, if the intent is to describe an all-weather and dustless surface, I think we ought to use those words, unless something else is more appropriate. I didn't look at section A. It could be that the reference to an appropriate parking surface clearly indicates that they're referring to the kind of surface described in A, but to avoid any ambiguity, I think that we ought to, first of all, resolve any issues in that respect. But Well, see, A doesn't use the word appropriate. If A would have said an appropriate surface is an all-weather and dustless surface, and then we would have had a reference to appropriate parking surface in B, then maybe the words appropriate parking surface would have been acceptable. But I think that whatever we do in A, we should also do in B. And then the larger question is, you know, what kinds of surfaces are acceptable to council as being, you know, appropriate to park? You know, is gravel not acceptable? Are these pervious surfaces that are intended to be permanent and firm but allow for water drainage through them, and even grass? Is that the kind of surface that we're interested in having? Does it have to be paved? Does it have to be blacktop? You know, those kinds of things. You know, I think, you know, what I could do perhaps is you know, do a redraft of B and maybe leave open some possibilities for council to consider.
Thank you, Mr.
I think one is a drafting thing and the other is a policy.
Mr. Pecora, care to expand on that?
No, I was just going to indicate that we should have some sort of definition of what this means so that there's no confusion and it's not left to one individual to guess or to ascertain what it is. Like, it should be pretty clear to our residents is what they're allowed to put in, and that needs to certainly be addressed and expanded.
Okay, so thank you. And we'll take questions from council, then I'll come back to administration, ask how do you recommend proceeding. With that, Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pecora was starting to answer the question I was going to pose. I was trying to dig it up here, our ordinance on this, and try to find the definitions page, which you may have in front of you right now, and I'm sorry that mine's not right here in front of me. As to what is defined, do we have a definition for parking surface at all in the definitions? And if not, maybe that's where Mr. Carlson can add an actual definition that we can all agree on would be an approved surface. And then the other question I have is, if you're having a garage floor that says hey, garage having a floor area of 200 square feet or multiples thereof shall be recognized as a parking space or spaces. So therefore, if you have a garage, you cannot, unless you go, it looks like you would not be able to get an extension onto your driveway for a car to be parked.
That's minimal. That talks about minimums. You can have as many parking spaces as you like. I believe that talks about minimums. Must have a minimum.
So you could have as many as you like. You can. That's my question. It doesn't seem to be clear as to how many parking, because it says only one driveway is permitted. We get that.
Well,
What is the parking space issue?
I think, Mr. Miller, that you know, the problem with this particular ordinance is that in the day we had R1, R2, R3, and it says shall be equal to the number of the number of parking spaces should be equal to the number of families living in households. Since we're crossing that out, I think that this whole paragraph relates to the possibility of there being 1, 2, and 3 parking spaces,
Right.
parking driveways, for instance. Because when we had the R3s, you could have 3 parking garages and things of that nature. So I think that's maybe just a retooling of this paragraph in general would be appropriate.
Is there any intent, and this, once again, we want to know the intent, is there any intent to limit off-street parking in this? Is there, for example, we've got people parking on grass because they have, in an R1 zoned area, one family, but they have 3 teenage kids that are driving, or 3 kids that are driving, plus the 2 adults. That's 5 cars. Now you've got, 2 garage spots, but of course the garage has got bikes and everything on the one side. You may be able to park 1 car in the garage, and then you got 4 cars. So they end up in the streets, they ended up hanging over on the sidewalk. Is the intent to curb 5 cars at a residence? Or is it intended to curb 5 cars parking on something other than a paved or, all-weather and dustless surface? Is the intent, what would,
I think we're trying.
is this a multiple intent?
I think some of the concerns, not all of it, is we still have people parking vehicles, I believe, on grass, for
But I think
instance.
we have ordinance against that.
Which we do have an ordinance against.
In the front yard.
In the front yard, but if we have, vehicles parked haphazardly in backyards, and I think that could potentially be a problem.
I think it's, is it 1142.12?
There's in the building maintenance code. maybe.
Yeah, why don't you look at that?
114102.
It talks, there's an ordinance that talks about all vehicles must be properly parked in a driveway in your front yard, but there's nothing that addresses it in the backyard, and that's why he wants to add this about your backyard surfaces.
And I think, isn't there a requirement that they be parked on a driveway?
On a driveway.
You have to be parked on a surface, of some form of surface. 'Cause we had that issue over on Quarry 5 years ago where we had a gentleman that wanted to move to make a drive to go around the side of his house and into the back. And maybe to a barn and I remember, maybe it's even longer than that. And there was an issue there with what type of surface he was going to extend his driveway with. So I don't know if this is kind of under that same umbrella, or what's our intent? Is our intent number of cars being parked? Is our intent the surface that they're parking them on? Is our intent to get them out of the street? Like, what's our goal here?
There are 3 things here. He's saying if you have, there has to be at least one parking place for, equal to the number of families housed in the residence. Now that needs to probably be made more clear. So maybe the
Okay.
language would be the minimum number of parking spaces required shall be equal to the number of families housed in the residence. So I think that's one part of that section. It doesn't set an upper limit. It simply does not.
Okay.
And then we're talking about where, and he's saying it can be in the backyard, and we're talking about surface, and we're talking about numbers of driveways. So I think there are 4 points addressed.
And number of actual driveways leads to some parking spot, whether it be in a garage or behind the house. Do we want 1, 2, 3?
We want one driveway.
Okay.
Now, so what has happened historically is that you have, particularly on corner lots, a house that faces one of the streets, but the garage may be behind the house,
Mm-hmm.
and the property owner wants to have a driveway to the garage directly from the other street.
Mhm.
So he's already got one in the front, and then he wants to build a garage in the back and put in a second driveway.
Right.
And the city didn't quite know how to handle that administratively. Was he asking for a variance? And the building inspector said, and I agreed with him, that it wasn't really a variance because we didn't have any requirement.
Okay.
So we're now establishing a requirement. So what this does administratively is if somebody wants more than one driveway, they're not going to the planning commission, which is where they used to go. They're not going to go to the zoning board of appeals.
Because we got one driveway in the ordinance.
Because you have
Got
a
it.
specific requirement limiting the number of driveways.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. That's perfect. So it's like a 4-way ordinance change. Got it. Perfect.
Mr. Mayor?
I think I see what the questions are, and I think I can meet with the building department and maybe we should table this and come
Yeah,
back in 2
please.
weeks with a better proposed ordinance, and we'll address all those little issues, and you'll have something to vote on, rather than sending it to council floor in the shape it's in.
Mr. Miller, you still have?
Move to table?
We have a motion. Mr. Dennis?
Second.
Bear with me here. So we have a motion and a second to table that. In advance of taking a vote, I'm going to ask, is there any additional questions, comments? Yeah, I'd like to just offer some observations from the 3rd Ward. While there is an ordinance prohibiting vehicles from being parked in anywhere other than a driveway in the front of your house, that ordinance is not enforceable for items such as boats on a trailer, buses used to transport kids in a recreational manner. It's just things we're seeing, and when we attempt to ask the people to move, it's not enforceable. At least that's the feedback I've gotten from the building inspector. With that, I would ask if there's anything we could do to keep people from parking on the grass. I would greatly appreciate it. It would definitely clean up some issues that we're seeing more and more of with time. completes my comments. Anyone else? Okay, once again, we have a motion and a second to table this item. Let's go with the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against say nay. And it is tabled with a vote of 7-0. 6-0. Thank you. And that concludes my business for the night. Mr. Cowger?
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Dembowski. Second. We have a motion and a second to thank you. All right, well, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against say nay. We are adjourned at 7:15.
Good evening. We will call this meeting of the Ordinance Committee on June 4th, 2018 at 7:17 p.m. The attendance will be carried over from the previous meeting. We have one item that we're bringing off the table, A18-28. It's our ordinance on mobile food vending. Mr. Mayor, would you like to speak to the changes that have been made?
I would really appreciate committee keeping this under discussion. There was some talk last week, 2 weeks ago, and Mr. Carlson and Mr. McCord and I, we worked on this. Mr. Carlson did a really good job organizing it, making it look like one of our other ordinances. There were some items brought up. The ice cream truck was one, so if you notice, the whole section on ice cream trucks. There was some wording, some concern about the noise level of generators. That's been brought up. There was a couple more things, Mr. Carlson.
The exemption that, for private events. So if you look at scope of chapter in 1153.12, there's a new section C. And it probably deserves some discussion about how far you want to go with this. Now this says that nothing in this chapter shall be construed to require a permit for the use of mobile vending devices on private property for private events or parties at which sales are not conducted on a per item basis or at community events sponsored by local community-based organizations. So that's a basis for discussion. The question is, were we going to exempt them from a permit requirement altogether? Were we going to exempt them from paying a permit fee, although they have to apply for a permit but don't have to pay the fee? If somebody brings one of these vendors, like one of those pizza oven trucks, for a party, that would seem to be okay on private property, graduation parties, and they're not charging on a per item basis. Does that make sense to say it that way? The owner of the property may say, look, Lorenzo's, you keep a tab going, I'll pay you at the end, or I'm going to pay you $500 to come out here and do the whole event. It needs to be discussed and some kind of agreement reached about what's reasonable in that regard. But other than that, I think it's basically what you saw before. It's been a little bit reformatted and shifted around a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Mayor?
I don't think our intent from the administration is to take fees from these private parties or community events. I don't think that's a necessity. I want to stay out of people's private parties and what they do at home, so I don't think they need a permit. And I think it's very well worded, what's exempted on that section. I think he did a really good job wording that. But I would not want to collect fees for those two things.
Well, it's just to play to argue that a little further. You know, the permit requirement relates to a lot of things. You know, safety issues, insurance issues, yada, yada, yada. Certainly the city has a stake in those issues when the vendor's operating on public property. So you want to have all those ducks in a row. You know. Do we not care about those issues if it's a private party? And the answer may be, maybe not. You know, maybe the private owner just makes that decision to bring that vendor on and he bears the risk. There's no liability to the city. You know, more power to him. That could be the right answer.
Can the chair ask a question to Mr. Miller, to the mayor?
I just want to comment about the community events, and they get inspected. I mean, they pretty much go through the same process with the fire department. They inspect them. Electrical inspectors come, inspect their hookups. So when they're a community event, sponsored by the community, and they fill out our community event form, those inspections come with that.
And then
So sorry.
No, that's fine. And then my comment was, I don't think it's that necessarily the city wouldn't care about that stuff.
Yeah,
However, the mobile vendors would still be required to meet state fire code,
Yeah.
any other thing that would supersede what we have here. So there would still be protections involved at the state level, if it was on private property.
You're right. That was an unfortunate use. We all care about what happens to people.
Mr. Miller and then Mr. Janet.
So the two questions I would have, if somebody's gonna have a food truck, which does have safety and fire and all kinds of issues, electrical hookup issues, and we want them to come into our city, and we want them to register with the city as a vendor, and we would have to get a permit if it was a business. What is the option or the thought behind possibly making sure that they're registered, if they want to come into the city, I don't care if you're on public or private property, and bring a mobile vending vehicle, whether it be ice cream, or whether it be on public streets, or whether it be ice cream on a private, we would still want them registered with the city. Would be my thought first. I would like to see them still registered with the city, so we know who's going up and down the streets, who's parking next to my house, if it's my neighbor. We were so worried about if one blows, the liability being multi-million dollars because the business next door may be impacted negatively. And we would want insurance to cover that. I'd like the city to know that one of these is coming in and parking and doing business in the city, so that, and even if we don't charge a fee, if it's for private party, charitable, maybe you just go and register with the building inspector, so that the city and the police and the fire know that, guess what, there's going to be operating a food vending machine in our city for an event. It's going to be parked, and they're registered with the city, and they have let the city know by requesting a permit. You're going to know ahead of time if you're going to have a graduation party, or you're going to do a family reunion in your backyard, and you want to bring a mobile vending in. It's no fee exists, and that vending truck has been registered with the city, and the city knows it's there, so you know what to expect. I don't think it would, in fire, fire could be an issue, so the fire department will know that there's a machine being operated with people around it. If you're having a party, or if you're having a community event, our citizens are going to be near a mobile food truck, and although the state does have certain expectations, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea if they're parking on a all-weather surface. Sorry, if they're parking on a private property. I haven't concerns about just letting anybody come in. I'd rather say that they're registered with the city and that a no-fee permit's requested. I think that would allow our safety services, our inspector, and to be able to respond and know that it's a valid food truck. Just a thought. That would be my request. I would like to see that in there if there's any chance to get that in now or. So what I'd love to do is amend this to read that they would still have to be registered, the food truck would have to be registered with the city, which means they have to meet inspection, and that the food truck or the occupant of the personal property that it's going to be placed on would have to pull a permit, a no-fee permit from the city.
Are you making a motion to do that?
I would like to move to amend to state once again that there will be a no-fee permit requested and the mobile food truck would need to be registered with the city, which means they'd have to meet those inspections that a truck coming in for any other reason would.
Please.
I think it's a safety issue for our residents as well.
Do I have a second on that amendment? Mr. Warnarski?
Yeah, I'll give it a second to continue conversation.
Procedurally, do we need to have the exact wording done now, or is that something that would go back to the law department?
Well, I think he wants discussion before we even get to that point.
Well, correct, we have, but if we did, okay, if that did pass, is that something that we would need to figure out the exact wording on? Are we voting on the exact wording, or are we voting on the concept?
You could give us direction and we could tweak the language and,
Okay.
and, you know, as we know, we can amend all the way up to the second, or the second, so.
Okay, then there's currently a motion on the floor to amend one of the sections so that all food trucks will have to be registered within the city, including those for a private party, but private parties would not have to have a fee. Is that accurate, Mr. Miller? And Mr. Warner?
Correct. That would be the scope of, where it says scope of chapter, you can say under there, if it's for charitable organizations, then it wouldn't need, it'd be a no fee permit. Would need to be pulled.
Discussion on the motion. Mr. Warnarski, Mr. Law Director, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Real wide open. I'd like a legal opinion on, is that an option and how would we? I'm interested. I think there's a lot of validity to it.
Well, I agree, but the question is to Mr. Miller, Mr. Miller, is your concern about vehicles, for instance, that have the flammable liquids, the combustible tanks? Is that what your concerns are, or are you talking in general? For instance, you know, without the sort, I mean, right now you can have a caterer come to your home and cater a party. Are they required to have a permit? Not necessarily under here because they're not in any mobile vending unit. Are you talking about simply
A mobile unit, a mobile food truck, yes.
driveway, the
Correct.
pizza oven, that type of thing?
Correct. It serves out of their truck.
Well, I imagine the city has a right to you know, regulate anything that pertains to safety. For instance, I can't have a bonfire in my backyard. I can't have certain things going on in a backyard, close proximity to other neighbors. But I guess what I would want to know is what parameters were you looking for? Are you talking about all vending units, or just units with the combustible tanks and the flammable liquids, or the pizza oven, for instance, could be a wood-stoked oven that has nothing to do with the flammable tank or flammable liquids or combustible tanks. Arguably not as dangerous as that type of unit.
Would that pizza oven need to be inspected if it was going to service for a business on a public street? Would it be serviced? Would we still have an inspection requirement? Would we still have them to be registered in the
I
city?
imagine under this ordinance, you'd have to have they'd have to have permits, which you have to have the inspections.
So to get registered in the city, do you have to have inspections by our fire department? My understanding is we
I
do.
don't know, I don't know that you need an inspection. That's not part of the permit process in this. There has to be a picture of the device,
Right.
and the safety service director has to review that along with other information.
So for me, that would be fine. If they register their vehicle to come into the city of Amherst and put up a pizza oven or a food truck or an ice cream or whatever, just register with the city. So the city knows you're coming in and doing business, which it doesn't, now is there a registration fee right now with the city?
No, not under this ordinance. There may
Okay.
be a registration fee for door-to-door vendors, I think there is,
Okay.
but I'm not aware of any.
So all they're doing, so all I would be requesting them to do is register. So they
Well,
register if they're coming in and doing business here in the city,
You
And-
should consider the insurance requirement.
which is part of that, right?
Which is part of the process.
Which
So
is part of the
you're saying-
process.
We're saying you have to get a permit, but what you're arguing, but we're gonna waive the fee.
Right,
So the permit requires them to have
absolutely,
insurance.
absolutely. And I think that that's important. If you're gonna put the vehicle that's got either a flammable tank or wood burning, we want, I think if you put it in a neighborhood's driveway and you got neighbor kids running around the neighborhood, you know, who can just pull up a truck? Can I just take a U-Haul and flip it up and put a pizza oven in the back of it and not get it inspected and roll it into somebody's driveway? Or can I get my own propane stove that I just, built in my backyard and from Johnny's graduation, and I'm gonna bring 3 tanks of propane and I'm gonna serve out of my back of my truck. And so I think it doesn't hurt. It doesn't to me. I don't think we're putting in an overburden for them to come in. They just have to register. The owner says, hey, I'm pulling a permit because I'm gonna let you know I'm having one of these trucks come in and set up in my driveway. And that way we know where we have mobile food vending in residential area. My biggest concern is residential area. We have an ice cream, we wanted that in there to make sure that we knew that people are coming up and down the street with ice cream trucks that are registered.
I think the city has more of an interest in its public areas. I understand what you're trying to say about our neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods we have private homes and private lives and private individuals and private property lines, and we choose to have certain activities in our homes. That's different than regulating what's happening on our streets in the public sphere. I think that's the intent of this legislation. If we want to look at something pertaining to homes or private individuals, I think this is probably overburdensome. I mean, Mr. Carlson alluded to, for instance, the $2 million insurance provision for these units, and it's certainly necessary in the public sphere, but is it truly necessary in a private arena?
It's a lot of insurance.
It is a lot of insurance,
Right.
yeah.
And then are we precluding our citizens from having what we've been probably already having for decades in this town, our private parties with our private, we hire somebody to perform a service, we assume the responsibility and liability for that. If something goes wrong, we have our homeowners insurance, we have our car and automobile insurance, we have our own private insurance to take care of our private needs, so to speak. So.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to?
Yeah, I would. I'm sure the thought is with good intention to protect the public, but I really wouldn't want to get in the business of regulating what residents are doing in their own yards with parties. I mean, this is a mobile vendor. I mean, where do we stop there? The clown that comes with a little tent and blows up balloons, that could be considered a mobile vendor. All the neighbors that get together and bring all their own little gas grills is just probably as dangerous as a food truck. I gotta believe people should be able to do their own due diligence, hire good contractors or good business people to come into their yards and their neighborhoods. This really isn't meant to go that far with this. And I haven't seen it in any other, not that we have to do what other cities do, but I haven't found that to be true on any of the other ordinances that I've found online. They completely exempt the private parties in residential districts and completely exempt the community events. So, and I would really be against a free permit. You know, I can't be in the business of every time somebody has a party, making sure that they have their permit for free. And I think there's more of these going on than we realize. I mean,
I was gonna say, how many come in, how many of them food trucks come in and park?
and this isn't just,
pull in
again, it's not
somebody's
just
driveway?
food, not just food trucks. And if somebody wants to have their own private party and hire one of these, more power to them, and they should do their own due diligence to, the city wouldn't be responsible in any way. It would be the business person and the homeowner in my mind to regulate what they're doing on their own property. So I would, like I said, I think you've got good intentions here, but I would really hope that we reconsider that and exempt those two items.
Well, we do regulate, we permit the crap out of people for what they're putting in their homes and how they're running their wiring and their gas furnace, and because of safety issues of the home and the residents and people in the neighborhood. So I would say that bringing in a vendor that's going to park right there on property next to another home. I mean, in some of these areas, we have some pretty close homes. You know, I just would like to,
Again,
we have this open, we have an opportunity here. I don't think it's overburdensome for them. All they have to do is register with the city and pull a permit.
Mr. Winarski and then Mr. Jack.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dembinski, Mr. Chairman. Legal question, I have something show up in my, be it a food truck for my kid's graduation. An issue occurs, it's on my homeowners, isn't it? Or do we know, or is that an insurance?
I mentioned the vendor will have his or her own insurance, and you'll have your own insurance, and that's just.
Okay.
And what if they don't?
But-
What if they have minimal? What if they?
We open forum now?
I guess that's what lawsuits are for.
So please keep in mind that only one person has the floor until recognized by the chair.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Winarski, you do have the floor.
Thank you. So with regards to, and if this were to move forward, I guess, how do you decide who gets their fees waived? I mean, is there a special request? Do you have to go before a special committee? Can you just use the phrase, if it's in a residential area, that they're eligible to have their fees waived?
Well, I think
The scope.
what we would do, I don't know where we would do it, but for example, where it talks about, this is on 115303 at the end, the annual permit fee, I could put another subsection just saying that the fee is waived for private parties and community events sponsored by local community-based organizations. Then I would probably delete C under 1153.12. That's just the thinking I'm having off the top of my head.
So before getting too far into perhaps specifics, let's keep a general discussion now and see, once everyone gets their thoughts out, see if it passes or fails, and then if that needed, if it does pass, we can worry about sending it back. Is that okay? Okay, no objection to that.
One final comment. If I may.
No, you did have the floor. Mr. Winarski and then Mr. Jack.
Thank you. With that, I think you got a perfectly usable, section C here. If there's issues that come up by virtue of it, we can address that later. I think as it's written, it's perfectly serviceable. I think it works, in my opinion. Unless, I'd like to listen to other people's comments on that. But I think as written, it stands alone. It stands well. Thank you.
Mr. Janik and Mr. Carter.
Yeah, I've got a twofold question in relation to the community events that we do. Do we currently require those mobile vendors to have insurance when they come in?
They do as part of the event application, and then we make sure that the event itself has insurance. I mean, the event itself carries a significant amount of insurance.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're not asking
And I'll be honest,
to
we
do
always,
something that we wouldn't be doing of the people that are coming in for the community events. I mean, so they're not holding us, responsible for, well, you're making us do it, why don't the people from the community events do it? you know.
And I do know we require the event to carry a significant amount of insurance, and we can probably put language in the event package to make sure those vendors, rather than make it part of the ordinance, we just don't give them an event permit without that extra language being in there, so we
Sure.
can definitely tweak that. I think it's
That could
there,
work,
but
that
if
could
it's
work.
not, I can require that.
And I really like the section on the ice cream trucks. Thank you for adding that. That's great. Everything, I mean, looks really good. Thank you.
Mr. Calder and then Mrs. Vasilic.
Yes, I had a question for the treasurer. Since we're asking as far as registering with the city, independent contractors, do they register and do you collect taxes from them for jobs they perform in the city?
Anybody that performs work in the city is subject to income tax. What you, I mean, the issue with the contractors and such might have to do with the withholding. They're only required to withhold taxes if they've worked in the city for, I believe it's 20 days over, or at least 20 days. But anybody that does business, you know, earns money in the city is subject to city income tax.
Okay.
Depending on whatever their circumstances.
So if we didn't have them register and they came in and they did 30 different parties in a year in the city, they would be required to, or we should expect that they would be required to pay withholding taxes like any other brick and mortar business in the city would. Or any other contractor that would be coming in and doing a job for 30 days. You know, so if we're requiring, I can see them needing to be registered so that, you know, they're following and being held to the same standards. You know, we have language in here holding them to go before the design review board to hold them to the same standards as the other people in the downtown district. Looking at a broader spectrum, they should be held to the same standards in the city that we hold all other vendors that come into the city to do business. And, you know, the city runs on revenue from taxes. If they're required to pay taxes like any other vendor in the city, then they should pay their fair share of the taxes to the city, in my opinion. I mean, they're coming in, they're doing the same thing that anyone else. So I can see that we should require them to be registered, and then, you know, we should hold them just like any other private contractor if they're coming in, and use the same type of language that you would for, say, a flooring installer or a roofer. You know, a roofer comes in, generally, they're done in a day. If it's a smaller house, they come in the morning, tear the roof off with a big crew, put a new roof on, they're gone the next day. They're all required to be registered with the city, and then if they do enough work in the city, they're required to pay the city a portion of the withholding. So I think that these places should be held to that same standard. That's all I have.
Mrs. Vasilic and then Mr. Miller.
I have a couple of questions for the law department. Some of our churches right now have mobile vending come in. They park in their parking lots. I know of two churches right off the top of my head that bring in these mobile vendors, and they provide them, or maybe three, in fact, now I'm thinking about it, for various activities. Is this going to have any impact? What kind of impact is it going to have on them?
I imagine that
It's usually barbecues.
if it's on private property, I think
Yeah.
that's some of the concerns that the mayor is expressing.
Yeah.
It's private property, you have your private event, you're hiring them, you're assuming the responsibility and the liability. If you have a fish fry, for instance, you're boiling all that oil.
Sure.
If accidents happen, well, you have insurance to, your own insurance to cover it as the person hosting the event, and also the person providing the services who have insurance for operating their business. So I would hope that this ordinance does not prevent those churches and public or those community organized events from happening.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not.
what
I don't think
I'm,
that's the intent.
It's not the intent, I don't think it does.
okay, I just want to make sure that you're comfortable
Right,
with that.
there's a definition of what a community event is, and there's a definition of community-based organization. Community-based organization includes 503C organizations, but it's more expansive than that, because it comes from the section defining when vendors are exempt from sales tax. And some nonprofit charitable organizations are recognized in Ohio to be exempt from taxation, even though they're not 501c3 organizations. Some churches don't even apply for 501c3 organization or tax exempt status for whatever reason. So I think it's broad enough to cover that situation and exempt it, as it's written now, from the permit requirement.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Another question is, what about shopping centers? Now, we haven't seen it so much in recent years, but we did have, when Kmart was here, we had carnivals. And we had some kind of a carnival event, and the main carnival came in, like there were independent vendors that came in also. And I could see that. I could see the hospital having some kind of outreach event. I could see Nordson, some of these commercial facilities. Is this going to have an effect on them and their ability to do that? And
Okay, let me take a step.
you understand my question?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think Nordson might be viewed as a private property owner and exempt from the permit requirement as such. So they're having essentially a park. The shopping center is a mobile vending on private property, which is permitted in this ordinance, but for which they have to get a permit. And they have to, in addition, satisfy some other specific additional requirements. They have to meet setback requirements. They can't have the device, in violation of setback requirements. They have to show proof that the owners are permitting them to be on the property, the private property. So that's clearly covered under the ordinance. What was the other thing? Well,
The hospital.
the hospital would be a community event sponsored by a community-based organization. In other words, a charity.
All right,
An
so
example.
you don't see any problems. Okay, fine, I just want to make sure. There's also on page 5 and page 7, you have you have two questions highlighted. At the top of page 5, item B, there's a question, do we want to add hours? And then on page 7, item C, it has 60 days highlighted. I think maybe we need to answer those two questions, because those are highlighted, and we need to make sure that we agree with those.
Should we circle those back around until after the motion that's on the floor?
It's a different.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that that needs to be addressed before we finalize it. And that's the end.
Mr. Miller and then Mr. Demick.
Probably more for Mr. Carlson, 115304 on page 3. Permit application for vending device on private property.
Yes.
And here's where I think you've stated, application for permit. Why would we not just hold any vending that's coming into the city to this requirement? And if it's, and where we go back to the fee pay part of it, that's just where we put, if it's a private vendor or a private party or community-based, blah, blah, then they're exempt from a fee. We do it now with the sidewalks. We're giving out permits for sidewalks to be fixed and vendors to come in without having to pull a permit fee and pay for it. Why are we, I mean, why, if it's a private or party and we're trying to not burden our, why not just go ahead and say, yes, you don't have to pay a fee, but you still have A, B, C, D, and E under 1153.04, which include these requirements. I like it. I like these requirements. I like how you put it with device next to public sidewalks, parking lots, driveways, and other areas usable for vehicular travel or parking. The vendor tends to vend. It's got to say where it's going to be. Is it going to be hanging over a sidewalk while it's at the end of the driveway? Is it going to be?
Okay, I think those are all good questions. I think that what section 115304 is dealing with is the vendors at Giant Eagle, or the vendors at wherever they set up. So it's private property, it's not public property. But we still have an interest, since the public is there, in controlling their activities in these additional respects that are set forth in 115304. Where 115312C kicks in is we acknowledge that private parties are on private property, but we're saying we're not going to regulate them. Even though you're right, maybe the requirements of 115304 would otherwise apply to a private property party situation. We're saying no, we're keeping our hands off of that. That's up to the private property. I don't know if that clarifies things. I'm trying to give you an idea of the structure of this chapter.
And I think that all these things that we've been discussing, if I may, Mr. Chairman, continue with my question, comments. We're always about safety, liability, insurance, safety of our residents. And it seems like we care about that in every location except for our neighbor's house. When they bring that vending piece in there. I don't understand why we wouldn't just say, you want to bring a mobile food truck in and park it. We just need to know, pull a permit. This is where you're going to park it on the private property and be done with it. For the sake of the neighbors and the residents, the community, the city, safety services. I mean,
well, that's certainly what you're discussing. And maybe I'm out of hand by debating this with you, but I think it's a different situation when you have a vendor at Giant Eagle, and the public's invited to go to Giant Eagle to buy groceries, and they may not have any choice about walking around a mobile vending device that's been set up out there. So the city it seems to me, has a really legitimate interest in that kind of regulation. Somebody who's going to a private party has been invited by the private property owner for certain limited personal reasons. And they can choose to go to the party or not if they don't like what's being served. So I think there's a continuum of interest on the part of the city. And I think you have to acknowledge that the city's interest in the private property is different from, less than it is, in other.
so this is private property and it doesn't state this, but I'm going to just under the assumption that the way you're placing this out there, this is private property for commercial use.
Yes, and it's limited to commercial districts, but.
So 115304 says that private property in commercial area.
If I may, perhaps only because there is some confusion about that. If you weren't part of this conversation, if you read that, perhaps you believe it would pertain to your own private event on your own private property. But perhaps we need to flesh out the language the mayor's point out to number 9, item 9, on which page is that?
5308.
5308.
But if we were simply, Mayor, to look at 115304, and in and of itself, a person could be confused, and perhaps we needed to direct this to, what, as Mr. Carlson said, a private property, but for commercial purposes. For instance, the Giant Eagle situation where you do have to cross, and I do it every Memorial and Labor Day, you walk past them making ribs outside. I have no choice but to go past them and something can happen. So I think that's what Mr. Carlson's trying to do. The other thing is, from Mr. Miller's point of view though, do we have anything in place that, for instance, prevents the food truck for the private event, for the private graduation party from parking on the street where I'm walking down the street and people at the party are going back and forth? I don't know if that's covered in there, and perhaps.
Well, that's probably a good question, because one of the requirements is you can't vend well,
Setbacks, right?
well, there's a setback issue, but there are prohibitions against vending in the street.
And to Mr. Miller's point about safety, I could see if there's one of these mobile vending units on Westchester where I live.
Oh, okay, wait, let's parse that out. If it were on the street, it would be on public property.
Sure.
It wouldn't be exempt from the requirement.
So if the vendor is actually parked in my driveway, away from the parking lot, and within the setback requirements, then we're satisfying our private individuals' rights to have a nice
Yes.
private party and protecting the individuals walking on the street or not attending the party.
So does this setback apply though? If it's, because it looks to me like you got carte blanche if this is a private property and I'm not selling or I'm just paying this vendor. For example, I got a driveway or somebody has a driveway and the neighbors have their driveway on the same bordering lot. And all of a sudden their driveways are separated by 8 feet, which may be a 4-foot setback. I think your driveway can go all the way to your property line. And they park right here in my driveway, my kids are playing in that. I've got a flammable truck that's cooking out barbecue, that's smoking going everywhere, and the noise from it, it's right next to my, I just, for liability's sake and for insurance sake and for safety issue, do we want them to say just, if you're registered with the city, we know you've been inspected, there's a safety issue taken off the table there. If you are going to have a private property and bring this onto the property, you're going to just register or pull a no fee permit or register, I mean, state this is where I'll be. So police can come by and drive and see if it's an issue, or that we can better regulate it. Thank you. Mr. Carlson,
I guess
appreciate it.
one could say it's amazing that our city is still standing and not burnt down without all these regulations.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could pull them all and then shoot guns in the air on celebration of our party. I mean,
So
the
they
bullets
would-
land, they land.
They still would have to follow all the state safety codes and everything like that. If they're vending out of there in their business, they would still have to have a food license and be inspected. And I mean, there would still be things that would need to be done in order for them to be able to serve.
And they would have to be on private property, so they couldn't be in the street.
They can be in the driveway next to my
Yeah.
driveway.
Maybe that's the only place to put,
Right, well,
and then, I don't know.
So, I'm sorry.
There are noise ordinances, there are other things that may protect the interest of the adjoining property.
Mr. Miller, are you?
yes, I yield back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Mr. Janik, Mr. Minarski, then Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I wanted to address page 2, 1153-03, for the permit and the item of electrical usage, item E.
That's not to do with this
If they're
amendment.
planning on using a generator for more power, obviously, is there a way we can raise the fee for the permit?
It's not to do with this amendment.
Well, I was gonna ask that. Is that's for all of them or specific to private residents?
This would be for public,
So it'd be for all of them?
for public,
So
right?
I think it's a valid concern, but could we circle back around
Yeah,
after
yeah.
the amendment?
Yeah.
On that,
That's
Mr.
fine.
Marcy, is your?
Yes, I'm staying within item C there, whatever. Anyhow, the example we have here of Giant Eagle, they are selling items on a per item basis,
Right.
making them ineligible for the exemption that letter C offers.
Yes,
So
yes.
this is covered. The question or the point was made about noise and smoke. That's nothing unique to life in the big city here. You don't have to have a mobile truck in your backyard to have noise and smoke. I think the police commonly refer to as nuisance ordinances. So that'd be covered there. You can't protect against that. And those are just my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm just going to ask it to pass this as it is to floor council. I'm really not concerned about the income tax issue. There's plenty of income tax laws. I really think we're still able to collect income tax. You can't, not everybody that does business in every single circumstance registers one way or the other. you know, they're required to pay income tax, whether they're registered or not. This does say anywhere in a residential zone. There's gotta be a reason with all my research and all the other ordinances I found that no other city, and I'm just gonna be a double negative, I guess, does not exempt private parties and charitable community events. You know, I gotta use the wisdom of some of these people who's tried this ordinance in the past. It'd be a enforcement nightmare, I believe. So I truly, honestly believe this is good. If we run into problems and we need tweaking it, if you find we need to tweak the income tax code, so we make sure these kind of people, but that, I don't think the income tax is the worry with this legislation. I'm just gonna please ask that you really don't pass this amendment.
So the current motion on the floor is to amend this legislation to allow, so that all food vendors would have to get a permit with the city, but they would not have to pay a fee. Is there anybody that would wish to speak on that amendment which has not already done so? Seeing none, let's go through and take a vote then. I guess we'll do a roll call, or a roll call vote. Mr. Miller,
No, I'll take the mayor's recommendation.
Mr. Janik,
No.
the chair will vote no. Mr. Renarski?
No.
Mr. Cowger?
No.
Mr. Naylor?
No.
The motion fails, 0-6. We had a few other issues that come up, or that came up during that conversation. One of them, the first one, was from Mrs. Basilic about the 60 days in item 115309C, and also the hours in 115307D. Did you want to speak to that again, or?
No,
just break it up?
I just wanted to make sure that we addressed it because it's a question that needs to be asked.
I think, do we want hours? Probably is just a note that's not been removed. I mean, there are hours that they cannot be operated between midnight and 9 a.m. is right in that. I mean, does that make sense? I think that's just some notes that didn't get taken out. Does that make sense?
If everyone's good with the hours of midnight and 9 a.m., we'll move on to the next piece. In 115309C, it says a mobile vendor permit can be suspended for a period up to 60 days. Does council feel that 60 is an adequate time period to have the permit revoked? Suspended, not revoked. I'm sorry. Thank you. Mr. Renarski.
My question would be, why do we need to attach a date on it? Why can't we just say it can be suspended and leave it at that? Is there,
I guess it's a question of reasonableness. If we get too restrictive, I guess I'm just guessing here, that if we're too restrictive, are we running afoul of people's due process rights?
okay. Then my follow-up question to that would be, is 60 days, would that be us, would we be compliant with that? Would we be within our
I guess
rights to go 60, or is that too
Question
many?
is it sound reasonable?
Yes.
I guess the council can, in its deliberations, can decide what it feels is reasonable. But I think you should have a set period of time.
Okay, that answers both my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Does anybody else wish to speak on the 60 days? Cool. We'll go on past that. Mr. Janik, you have, I apologize, it's slipped my mind. Would you please re-ask your question for vote?
Yeah, 115303, page 2, item E. My question is, if we're using electrical generators, especially for a period of time, such as, like the treasurer said, if they're here for 20 days, or they plan to set up for 20 days, and they're using an electrical generator that generally uses more power than standard electric, I do think we should be charging them more. Or I would like to see the fee go up to at least $250 for the permit. If it's using more than standard electric supply.
Mr. Henry?
I think he's talking about if he's actually hooked up to a city utility. So if there's spots that have utilities available, that would be in their permit, and those fees would be attached to the permit and set by the safety service director. I think somewhere it says something about extra fees or extra.
Yes.
So if there's extra costs, the safety service director can actually regulate those in the permit itself if they hook up to electrical.
So that would be good. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on anything related to the proposed ordinance? Mr. Winarski?
I guess I'd motion to send this to the floor council.
Mr. Ahern?
Second.
Is there any further discussion on taking this to the floor of council? Seeing none, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair also votes aye. All those opposed say nay. It will move to council with the 6-0. That's all I have, gentlemen. Mr. Cowder?
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Winarski?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 8:06.
So I'll get the ordinances to you, and then, if you want, why don't you just talk about it?